Members, the committee is resumed. The question is that Clause 3 stand part. Dr. David Clark.
Well, Mr. Chair, thank you. This is a clause which refers to the Principal Act and to amending the Principal Act. I have a very short story which I wish to share with the House that illustrates the benefit of not amending this Act but instead attaching the legislation to another Act. And it is a story some will know and some will not know. It's the story of Nasruddin. Nasruddin was caught in the act and sentenced to die. Hauled up before the king, he was asked by the royal presence, "Is there any reason at all why I shouldn't have your head off right now?" To which he replied, "O king, live forever. I know that I, the mullah, Nasruddin, am the greatest teacher in your kingdom, and it would surely be a waste to kill such a great teacher. So skilled am I that I could even teach your favourite horse to sing. Given a year to work on it." The king was amused and said, "Very well then, you move into the stable immediately, and if the horse isn't singing a year from now, we'll think of something interesting to do with you." And the story concludes. As he was returning to his cell to pick up his spare rags, his cellmate remonstrated with him. Now that was a very stupid question. You know that you can't teach that horse to sing, no matter how long you try. Nasruddin's response, "Not at all. I have a year now that I didn't have before, and a lot of things can happen in a year. The king might die. The horse might die. I might die. And who knows, maybe the horse will sing."
Well, that's a prediction of another Labour leadership.
And that is a story that indicates the benefit
of... Yep. So we've had 2 minutes of something that's completely unrelated to the bill, and I'll ask the member in future debates to concentrate. This is Clause 3. It's a very narrow debate, this part on Clause 3, so I'll now ask the member to continue on Clause 3.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
No, I've ruled.
Mr.
I'm
Chair.
waiting for your response.
Okay, Mr. Chair, well, I will continue in speaking to the Principal Act amendment by saying that that story that I have just told clearly illustrates the benefit of pushing this Act, not amending this Act as the Principal Act, but amending another Act. For example, the estimates, if we amended the estimates, the debate would still to be had. We haven't had that debate yet. There are plenty of other debates that will be had this year in the House. If this legislation was amending those acts, if the legislation was jiggeried around so that it could fit into another act, it would wait to be passed. And we wouldn't be passing it under urgency today without input from the public, without the opportunity to speak about why this deprives New Zealanders, 500,000 New Zealanders, the government tells us, of their opportunity to get the $1,000 Kickstarter payment. And that, Mr. Chair, is why it is important to wait. Many things can happen if we amend this legislation in another way and allow opportunity for the public to comment. The government might be persuaded. They might hear the logic that has been espoused in this House. And no doubt there'll be more that the public can add. That's why we have select committee processes. In the short time we've already heard from some stakeholders who've launched some press releases into the public. For example, the Financial Services Council, who said this legislation is like robbing the kids' piggy bank and heading down to the pub for one more beer. Now, many members of the public will have their own wisdom to bring to the table. They may bring their own version of the story of Nasruddin. But what we do know is that when we have measured processes through this House, we get valuable input from the public. And so by changing the Principal Act to be amended to an Act that is a different Act, that is to fall and be debated later in this parliamentary chamber, we provide more opportunity for people to engage in the debate and for this crazy change to be pushed out to another time. And who knows, the Prime Minister may step aside. We know that he is increasingly out of touch with New Zealanders, and there are movements within his own cabinet. And so many things can happen, and that is why, if we don't amend this Principal Act in this way, but we choose to attach it to another Act, additional time will benefit us all. So let's think about some of the other acts that could be amended, Mr. Chair. For example, well, actually, first let's examine what would happen if we didn't amend this Act. If we actually left this entire clause out, What would happen if we left this entire clause out? And that is an interesting question, because what happens when you leave the entire clause out of the Act, of course, Mr Chair,
Dr David Clark.
what happens when you leave the entire clause out of the Act is that the legislation doesn't make sense anymore. We would argue on this side of the House it never made sense anyway. But that's a debating point. We don't particularly like what's being rammed through here under urgency. But actually, if you didn't amend the Principal Act, if you didn't amend the KiwiSaver Act 2006, the Act that was designed to increase savings, and the Act that we've been told in the debate has increased savings by an estimated 36%, according to the IRD's own research on the effect of the KiwiSaver Act 2006 that is referred to in this clause. If we hadn't amended that, we would continue, we imagine, to attract savers at a rate of additionality that is similar to the 36% reported by the IRD in their extensive review of the effect of this particular legislation. They said that in 2010, their estimate was about 36%, and in 2013 that hadn't significantly changed. So what they are saying with that is that this Act increases savings for New Zealanders. It actually changes the savings culture. Now, if you didn't put this clause in here, Mr Chair, if this clause was not in here and this Act was not amended, then that 36% would not be lost, and New Zealanders would continue to save at a rate superior to the rate that they were saving before the KiwiSaver Act 2006 was introduced. So that, Mr Chair, is why I think it important that we could just leave out this clause. I would be in favour of that. I'll be interested to see what the government say, whether they think that this clause should be left out or not. And I'm sure Dr Nick Smith and the Chair will have a view on that. He has a view on most things, unless he is so ashamed of this legislation that he doesn't wish to speak to this particular clause. Oh, that's very flattering, Mr Brownlee. Very flattering, Mr Brownlee. And I would enjoy being on a quiz show with Mr Brownlee, because I do find Mr Brownlee entertaining at least. While he may not bring much substance to this particular debate, he is an entertaining member of the House, and so I would welcome the opportunity to be on a quiz show with Mr Brownlee. And perhaps he can suggest some shows. I don't know. He's quick on his feet, so we should have a debate about what that might be. But I'll return to the matter at hand, although Mr Brownlee, I look forward to his contribution shortly, because I expect he will want to defend this clause.
And you should consider it the last word.
Mr Brownlee says that his speech should be considered the last word, and if that isn't a sign of a government that's out of touch, that has lost touch with the people of New Zealand, I don't think anything is. And that is the kind of wisdom Mr Brownlee brings to this House. His word is the last word. He's the leader of the House. That is the reason this legislation is going through under urgency, because he says his word is the last word. New Zealanders be damned. Anyone who objects to this should not have the opportunity to participate in the parliamentary debate. That is the kind of government we have opposite. That's the kind of government we're staring down today as we protest against the changes that are proposed in this Act that will rob 500,000 New Zealanders over the next 4 years of that $1,000 that every single National MP has taken advantage of, and not one of them will stand up and say they haven't taken advantage of it. That is what we're facing here in this House, Mr Chair. So I think that is very, very much a lesson to those at home. And Mr Smith is putting up his hand to speak. I look forward to his contribution after this, because he will be a man who might set that record straight. He might say that many National MPs have not taken up that $1,000. He might say that he hasn't lined up his own family to take advantage of it. Who knows? We'll see. But we've certainly heard from one member of this House who's confessed that his family and he have taken it up, and now they're cutting it off for everyone else. This is a government that's out of ideas, it's failed to produce a surplus, and here we have yes, coming back to the point, Mr Chair, and you're quite rightly bringing me back to the point of the matter. I was feeling quite passionate, but if we left out clause 3, it wouldn't amend the KiwiSaver Act, and New Zealanders would continue to save at that additional rate that the IRD recommends of 36%. The savings of New Zealand will continue to be superior to what it was before the Act was introduced. And that, Mr Speaker, is why I think clause 3 should be left out of this bill. And I do think that would make a difference for New Zealand in the longer term. It would encourage the savings culture that this Labor KiwiSaver bill brought into place, and it would be a disappointment to the government, of course, because they are more concerned with their sham surplus that they can't achieve anyway, and filling the billion-dollar black hole that their economic mismanagement has opened up in their budget over the last year.
I call